Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like, because the purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and any issues related to those issues. A hearty shout out to the Rabyd Nation. Join the nation by hitting that subscribe button. And if you want to be a more supporter of the channel in a more tangible way, hit that join button, and your membership options for citizenship will be presented to you. Today I want to continue on in my Reconstruction story. I've done my deconversion story for 2023. That's in a playlist. I'll link it above my head. But I also, in a minute, but also I want everybody to understand what happened afterwards. Okay, I left the pulpit, what happened afterwards. I've already done one on 2018 and some of the start of that. But I want to talk about 2020 this time, that year. Now, let's be honest, 2020 is a year we remember whether we want to or not. Most of us would rather forget it, I think, because it was kind of a crazy year, pretty much for humanity worldwide. So, but I want to sit here and talk more about the deconversion aspects of how I went through that year and what changed in my mental state about things. Now, for me, my life from a work standpoint at that time did not really change that much. I worked in a grocery area, so I was considered an essential employee, and so I continued to work. Never really, and then my now ex-wife was in pharmacy. She worked in a pharmacy, so she was also an essential employee. So we never really took a hit financially at all, although both of us kind of looked at the people that got to stay home all the time and make money, almost as much money as we did, in some cases more, with a little bit of like, yeah, great. So it was kind of, from a psychological point of view, it was very challenging. And then me and my wife, of course, were going through our marriage issues, and we found ourselves having to spend even more time together at home. And for me, as my introverted self, that was pretty good. It was I posted a meme. I think, I'm an introvert. I've been training for this my entire life. It's like it didn't really bother me that much in that respect. I think that it actually offered me a little bit of relief, because one of the things that I was developing was this fear of running into a former congregation member. I'd actually had that happen a couple times. It was never a good experience. The running into people that were of faith, that remembered me as a pastor. These were things that were still bothering me at the time. Now they don't bother me hardly at all, but at the time it was so new and fresh that it was just an awkward conversation. And so what I was doing was kind of avoiding that. Well, COVID kind of made it easy for me to do that, okay, because I was staying at home. I was either at home or at work or traveling between the two. Because I already worked at a grocery store, I'd often shop afterwards and just bring stuff home, so it wasn't a big deal. The biggest thing that affected me negatively about all that was losing the gym for a while, which later on came back. But the gym was always my place of solace. It was my place to go and get right. I now realize that from an autistic point of view, working out is kind of one of my coping mechanisms. It brings my nervous system onto an even keel, and that was gone. So there was a lot of psychological things going on. But I was also, by this time I was deep into therapy, so I kind of used therapy and talking to my therapist as a way to cope with that and kind of get that out. And she was pretty good at walking people through. I think she was a little stressed out too, so it was, it was a couple of people that are stressed out about things talking to each other. And we were already doing distance communication, because I've never actually met my therapist face to face. It's always been over the interwebs. So it was that was kind of still there, and so it was kind of pretty good for me in that sense, that it got me to get through. But As far as my marriage go, the first 3 months of 2020 were pretty strong. We continued to work on things, but we started to slide. And one of the things that I began to be concerned about at that time was the fact that we were starting to slide, that we were starting to not look as good as we had been before. I saw a lot of old habits start to come back. I was starting to feel, even though we were spending an inordinate amount of time together, there was a lot of distance. Okay, it was just one of those really weird things where the more time we spent together, the more flaws in our relationship became apparent. And this brings up a deconversion issue of where you're assessing. Remember I said in my last video that I was assessing my marriage, whether it could be a cornerstone of what I believed or what my life was actually. And then what I began to realize was, I don't know if that's going to be possible, because one of the things that became very clear, because we'd have discussions on values and we'd have discussions on, what was going on in the world and things like that. And I was developing a different set of values of how to look at that didn't have anything to do with God. And she was still very much, believing that God was going to make things right, that everything was going to be okay because of God. And I was looking at the whole situation and going, boy, this is a real test for humanity to see whether or not, there's going to be a couple things, that we respect the freedom of our fellow human beings, but at the same time, are we communal enough not to do stupid things that'll get each other killed? It was really one of those challenges for me. And in all of that, though, one of the things that came out, because remember I talked about, career counseling, and I had three options in front of me: being a teacher, being some sort of activist, using my poli-sci degree, and being a writer. Well, the writing thing kept going. I didn't have anything else to do besides, goof around. But I decided to prototype being an activist, and for all of you, you now know that that's the year that this channel was born. This channel started as a way of me prototyping being an atheist, activist and advocate. And so I began this channel in January of 2020, before COVID hit, before anything started, as a way of prototyping that. At the time I was working on my, teaching certification, non-conventional. I was going through that pretty quickly. Man, I hit this channel and I was still writing. Okay, so I was prototyping all three. I'm still trying to get past the prototype stage in writing. I just love to write, but many times. And so I'm going through all of this at the time, and out of that came the Rabyd Atheist channel. And I want to talk a little bit about how that fits deconversion and reconstruction, because I suddenly realized I had a grave psychological need for a soapbox. Okay, I needed some place to talk. I'd always used blogging for that, and I'd always used, the church as a way to have that soapbox, as a way to get up on there and talk to people and tell them what I thought. As somebody who's very introverted, I could find a way to get into the pulpit and, perform, basically. A lot of people are aware that introverts often do go into performance arts or speaking things. There's a lot of introverts on YouTube, okay? Because there's something about it that allows you to express yourself, but it's a little safer. In my case, it's a good way to express myself without necessarily, exposing myself emotionally all the time. Although I have done that on this channel from time to time. But the YouTube became the option that I chose, and I started the Rabyd Atheist as a way to start to tell my story, to deal with the nonsense of belief and faith, and kind of talk it through, okay, and then share that with other people. And in my heart, there began to generate this desire to help people who were deconverting, people who were struggling with all the nonsense of Christianity. I felt that atheists were treated poorly compared to a lot of other belief and non-belief groups. So it was like, somebody needs to normalize this, that it's okay to doubt, it's okay to not have any beliefs at all, and not believe in something at all. And so out of that came this channel. Now, I was mulling this over in 2019, but it didn't become official until 2020 in January. And I started producing videos. Some of my early videos are still on this channel. I don't think I've erased a single video that I published, so they're still here. And you'll see those early days where I'm just trying to talk and get this out. And it's a nice little chronicle. And so my prototype was this channel, and the Rabyd Atheist was born. And, it's been an up and down roller coaster ride to get here. This is, right now is the most consistent I've really been with YouTube and posting, 5 to 6 times a week has been a real challenge. But I feel I finally am hitting my stride, at least my initial stride of being this advocate, activist. And I'm actually, now with ad revenue and a few other things, some super that and super thanks and a member, I'm starting to see the beginnings. Okay, this could work. So I think this year, at the end of last year, I think we got past the prototype phase, and the Rabyd Atheist is, Ed Raby is, an atheist advocate, an influencer, and trying to make things better for atheists and people that are deconverting. Okay, that is the goal of this channel, and that was born in 2020. So out of 2020, a few good things did come for me. I was writing a lot as well. I became very interested in Norse mythology and philosophy. I recently had a commenter ask about, the necklaces and all this stuff. And my interest started in that in 2020. Began to read Norse mythology, took a liking to Odin. People go, Odin, really? Why not Thor? Thor is too easy to like. Odin is more subtle in his approach in the fact that he is trying to preserve what he loves. He knows it's inevitable that everything is going to die and to be destroyed, but he still fights on. And I found that, and he has good reasons to fight on. He wants to preserve the world as is. He likes the world as it is. And, when you read the mythology, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I got it. And I can resonate with that. I want to preserve the world as is, keeping humanity alive. I do want to make progress. You want to learn things and grow as a person. And you see that in Odin's mythology too. And it's like the Norse people were trying to express this idea of, that there's this cyclical, continuous going on, the 4 seasons kind of life, and things do end eventually. But at the same time, we fight hard to keep a situation where we can love each other and take care of each other and so on and so forth. So it kind of resonated with me. And so that's why the symbolism. I just like it. I enjoy it. And there's a little philosophical edge to it. And I enjoy my surroundings because of it. Being, Scandinavian ancestry. And I began to explore my ancestry in 2020 because there wasn't anything else to do. It's amazing what other things we all found to do, during a time where we couldn't do much of anything else. So Reconstruction-wise, I'm just kind of give you the summary of what was happening that year. I continued to work. I was a department manager of meat at the world's largest brick and mortar for a while. When they restructured, I lost my position because it was a temporary, and then I went to night shift. And I've been working night shift before, and it was kind of a homecoming for me. I felt better about working at night. I just didn't like the fact that I lost my job due to restructuring and not because I did a bad job. In fact, I never got that. I got, hey, great job, Ed. Most of the time I did it. And just managing the stuff and making sure stuff is going well. And I learned that, and I enjoyed that job too. So, from a career standpoint, I was kind of stalled as a teacher because the year following we weren't going to do much of anything either. In 2020, every school was shut down and people were doing Zoom meetings to do school and so on and so forth. It was just kind of a totally chaotic time for education. So I continued to plod along in there, but I didn't do anything. But Reconstruction-wise, I began, as far as my philosophy is going, I was still focused on the virtues and living a virtuous life, being a good person. I was just having, problems with not being able to do some of the things that were good coping mechanisms for me. And I think that was the biggest struggle. That was something that bothered me. I began to realize how fragile society, humanity is. Because there isn't my perspective changed saying, I don't think there's a God that's watching over this anymore. So how does that influence us? Well, I became very much more humanistic, being more of a humanist. I'd always been a little bit of a humanist, kind of pushing humanity to do better. But now I realize that if we were going to do anything that was truly and genuinely constructive for humanity, we're going to have to do it for ourselves. There's no guy on a white charger coming in to rescue us if we really truly screw everything up. There are grave consequences for screwing things up. And, we need to make sure as humans we're working on solutions to make it better and do more and be more without harming one another. And, that's a, very libertarian thing to do. Have your freedom, but don't use your freedom to harm somebody. And so it became, learning my responsibility as a human being, being a decent human being, that there has to be a tangible action to that. And, part of that became this channel, part of it became, looking around me and trying to find things that I could do. And then watching, people, do what they need to do to survive was very interesting because I think, that year brought out the worst and best of us, okay? And we learned so much about ourselves. I think a lot of people learned about government and whether to trust it or not, and that some of your trust in government is kind of like trusting in God. It's going to be misplaced. And then other times, there were things that were done correctly, and it would seem to be okay. And so, this whole philosophy of life became challenged, and I think I developed a little bit of a stoic attitude at that time that would later become full-blown stoicism later on in a later year. But at this point, it was more an attitude of living life in such a way that I was getting through it, doing what I needed to do. My marriage, that question became a reconstruction question. I was constantly asking the question, is this a benefit to me? And COVID kind of extended our marriage by a year, I think, because I would have finished up my certification sooner and probably moved to Texas sooner had that not happened. And I don't know if she would have changed her mind and decided to come with me. Desiring to be with me at that time was probably maybe been stronger. But I was, writing on the Gray Wayfarer about virtue, but I was also talking about, okay, what is the value of relationships to everybody? And I was starting to realize that, my relationships had to have a value to me. What's the point of being a social species and having these relationships that are supposed to be mutually beneficial when a relationship that you have long term is no longer beneficial? Even if it's not, abusive, but it just is, it has more liabilities than assets, okay? I know that's a very cold way to look at relationships, but it's like a lot of people cling to very bad relationships because of some cost fallacy. And my therapist and I began to go over that back and forth. I mean, when people ask me about the decision to get a divorce from my wife, you need to understand it's like a 2-year decision. In fact, it would probably went all the way back into 2017 when I wasn't a believer anymore. And I'm looking at, okay, I'm going to eventually leave the church. What impact is that going to have on my marriage and family was a big question for me because I didn't know how my wife was going to react to that. I knew I couldn't trust her with the information because I just don't, I didn't know how she was going to react to it. And so once it all came out, now it was like, okay, can we gel? Can we get through it? And I know a lot of you are in mixed marriages, so to speak, from a faith standpoint, now that you've deconverted. And one of the things that did bother me is like, this is kind of my fault. It's one of the things I do wrestle with is guilt over this, because my spouse didn't change. I did. Okay. And it was my moving away from faith and saying, I can't do this anymore. And they're staying. Okay. That created the situation. Okay. And I realized that. Now, in the early years, I really dealt with a lot of guilt of that. Thank you for therapy. But it became an issue of what do I do about this thing now that we are no longer, because to me, if you're going to be, hooked up with somebody, your values have to be very similar, because otherwise you're going to eventually fight about it. Okay. And I knew we were headed two different directions. I'm like, I got to give back something to humanity. I've spent all my time wasting this stuff. And 2020 just kind of reinforced that to me, how vulnerable humanity is and how we need to pass on knowledge, how we need to, look out for each other and take care of each other. And, introverted autistic person that I am, I'm still shelled up in my thing, but I at least can observe humanity and realize, okay, something needs to change. But at the same time, I'm with somebody in my marriage that seems to be, oh, well, we'll just pray about it and it'll get better. And I'm like, that's not a constructive attitude to me anymore. And I also was starting to feel a little, I wasn't feeling neglected because we were spending all of our time together, but it was like the feeling of being two people that were just together because of a situation grew on me and started to gnaw at me. And I was really wrestling with that question. I bring up my marriage not because I want to embarrass my ex-spouse or my ex-wife or anything. I bring it up because I know a lot of you are struggling with this question. If I were to give any advice, and I'm not an expert, and getting marriage counseling, number one advice, okay? If you're really having this, and I would recommend go to a counselor that you both can agree on, but that's going to respect the fact that you don't believe, okay? And if they're not going to respect that and stay over that line, if they in the counseling session cross that line and try to proselytize you, get a different counselor, okay? Because that's not respecting you, okay? There's plenty of counselors out there. Make sure they have real credentials. Christians will credential each other at the drop of a hat, and that doesn't make them real. But just make sure that that's there. But the other advice I'd give you is, in your marriages, can you make this work despite your ideological differences? Okay, and it may be that you might be married to a more liberal Christian, and so the differences aren't all that pronounced. But when you're married to somebody that's a little bit more conservative, that believes the Bible, that believes all this stuff, you may have a real problem. And part of the problem, of course, was now I was pretty much open to explore a lot of things. And one of the things in 2020 that I really dug deep into myself about was my own sexuality. And I began to review all that. And that's the funny thing about faith, doesn't it? It stops you from exploring yourself. And so once it's gone, you're like, oh, I can think differently about these things. I can move forward into these things. And I started, it was then that I really dropped my bigotry towards anybody LGBTQ. I don't, it's not an apathy, but it's like, I don't care what you do or what you are. I'm going to still have empathy towards you as a human being, okay? Forget all the sexuality. Human beings should, watch out for each other as much as possible. And there are some human beings that are trash, I get it. But it doesn't change the fact that I lost a lot of artificially imposed, religiously imposed ideas of who I was supposed to hate, dislike, and have negative emotions to. So I think that year was a big year of me just dropping all the prejudices, okay, and getting rid of them. But at the same time, I'm exploring myself. And even looking back at it, I began to realize that, I don't, I'm still very heterosexual. I still like girls, still get turned on by women. But I also began to realize that was okay. It's okay, to look at somebody walking down the street that you're sexually attracted to and not feel guilty about that. Okay, that was a big one. It's like, that's pretty naturally human. Human beings are sexually attracted to each other. Weird, huh? It's how the species goes on. And the whole thing of being dedicated to one person all your life came under a question too, because I was questioning my marriage at the time too. And so the deconversion aspect of wrestling through this, I said, Ed, you've never really explored your sexuality. And it's still a problem to this day because I look back at it, and one of the things I got robbed of is as a young person and a young adult, maybe teenage, young adult years, I never really got to explore that question. Religion and faith kind of press you down. If you're a devoted Christian, you really have very little options there. One, you have to marry another Christian, and two, which limits your pool of perspective things. I do blame my faith in part for ending our marriage in some respects, though I don't know if my ex-spouse would do that, but I would, because it didn't allow us to explore other people that we could have married. Okay, it really didn't. And so, that incompatibility was built in, and the only way for us to keep it together then is faith and religion. Well, now I didn't have that anymore. And I really feel like I got robbed of that ability to explore sexuality, explore, what I wanted in a partner, things like that. And I just never got it. And I still feel like I'm robbed of that and say, oh, Ed, do you go out there and make up for lost time? But I just don't have the attitude of, some of you are probably struggling with this issue. Hey, you don't have to change, go whole hog and be promiscuous and any of that stuff because you're deconverting now. You can still maintain, hey, let's be smart about this. And I didn't have that opportunity. I feel like I got robbed there. But what I began to realize is in all of my relationships where I was romantically involved with a woman at some point in my life or another, when they left me, while that was very hard and emotionally troubling, I never was really jealous or angry about it, okay, that much. It was more of sadness. And the more I explored that, that's where I realized that I'm very happy in accepting a single heterosexual mono relationship kind of thing. But poly was definitely a possibility for me because I just don't get jealous about things. And I began to look at the sexual act itself. It's not inherently sinful. It's not inherently good. It can be done for fun. It can be done for a lot of things. And so taking away all the guilt of that, it's like, it's something that two people can do with each other. And if jealousy wasn't involved, we'd probably get along a lot better and the relationships would be better. I was really getting into the whole idea that jealousy is more of a problem in relationships than anything else. And that's a very polyandry kind of, view of things, And so I realized I could accept that kind of relationship, but it would have to be very formal. It'd have to have rules and things like that, but just to protect everybody involved. But it was pretty much, I wasn't homosexual, still am not. I don't feel like I'm a woman trapped in a man's body. I'm very happy being a man, very happy being masculine. And so all of those things began to be explored for me. And they're still very much true. And so, it was a time of exploring that. I had the time to think about it. So the humanism, the exploring my sexuality, my marriage is kind of in a rocky state at this point. And we both realized it, but we didn't want to say it. Okay. And I was trying to get my wife to go back to marriage counseling, but she wasn't having any of it. I was trying to get her to think about going to Texas where we'd get away because I was thankful for COVID in the sense that I didn't have to run into as many people, and I didn't want to run into former parishioners and former people I knew. And so that's kind of where I was at the time. And 2020 kind of ended that way too. I was working overnights, still in that state, working on my teacher's certificate. This channel was in its infancy. The Rabyd Atheist, the activist, the influencer was born. And I was just prototyping and having fun with it. I was writing a lot about moral philosophy and the Nine Noble Virtues and things like that on my blog, The Gray Wayfarer. It was just one of those years where I was just getting through it. And I think a lot of us felt that. And so that's where we were. Well, I'm going to cut it off. That's pretty much 2020 in a nutshell from a philosophical point of view. and I was just heading a certain direction. And I was starting to rebuild my life, but COVID got in the way a little bit and slowed some things down, but it accelerated a few others. So you always learn to do what you can about what you can. So that's kind of where I was. And so I'm going to kind of cut it off here. We'll talk about 2021 next time. That's where a lot of changes happened for me, and probably a little bit more interesting to talk about actually in some ways. But we'll leave it here. Thanks everybody for stopping by. I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. You guys are awesome. As always, live your best life. You only get one go around, and then it's over. And then you don't have the chance to use your opportunities, your life, your money, and things to build yourself up, build your family, build your friends, make this a better world. Don't waste it on that trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end, and I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.